So what do the triple 20 instant kill, a critical failure, and consensual combat have in common? Well, they're all some of my favorite house rules. Let's get started. Hey everybody, my name's Joe. Welcome to Tabletop Theory. Today, I wanted to talk about my favorite house rules that I like to include when I'm running Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition. Now, for those of you that may not have heard of it before, what is a house rule? Well, a house rule is a modification to the official rules for whatever system you're using. Sometimes these rules are just favorite modifications to the official rules that everybody at the table likes, like the hat trick instant kill that I'll talk about a little bit later. Or they're a collection of rules that make so much sense they eventually make it into the official game, like what happened with Pathfinder Unchained. Now, the thing to keep in mind about house rules is that they're not official. This means that before you bring any of them into play at your table, you should make sure that your players are going to be okay if you use them. And when you are going to be using house rule, try to use your best judgment about how and when to ask your players if they're going to be okay with it. But for the most part, you probably want to check with them before play begins, not like right before a house rule would come into effect. The thing is, if everybody's on board, then they're usually okay, but if someone isn't on board for your house rules, then you probably shouldn't use them. There are very few exceptions to this, but generally I try to look at a house rule as a possibility, not a certainty. If you're a GM and people have come to you in order to play Dungeons & Dragons, it makes sense that they would expect to play D&D and not a modified version. That's not to say you don't have a chance of actually using house rules, it just means that if people don't want to use them, that's okay. But it all kind of comes down to what people are comfortable with, and a lot of times people's comfort level is based on their expectations of what the game is going to be like. So with that being said, let's jump into some of my favorite house rules. Critical failures. So even though the rules in 5th edition don't stipulate critical failures as a thing, I still like them. I believe that there is something to be gained from failure, even if the failure is caused by random chance and there isn't anything to be done. I think that small failures help me to appreciate the big successes that I have, especially when I'm playing RPGs, which is why one of the house rules that players can choose to adopt when I'm running 5th edition is the inclusion of critical failures. Now, the point of a critical failure is to emphasize the lack of control in a small way. Just like the player can't control when they roll a natural 20, they can't control when they roll a 1. Out of combat, a critical failure for the house rule that I would use would sometimes mean getting lost or breaking a piece of non-magical equipment like, I don't know, a quill. The failure should be something that would be inconvenient but not render their character useless. This means that if your player is playing a rogue who loves to pick locks but rolls a natural 1 when they try to bust open a treasure chest, don't choose that natural 1 to break their lock picks, just break the lock. That way the player can continue to pick locks later, but they just can't be successful on that lock and they might need to ask another player for help. Sort of like asking a fighter or a barbarian, damn, the lock's broken, maybe you should smash that open for me. Teamwork, right? In combat, critical failures are pretty simple. A natural 1 ends your turn. No broken equipment, no getting knocked prone, nothing that has lasting impact beyond the player's turn. It can be something as simple as a stumble or a bungle, and that means that the player needs to end their turn as soon as they roll a natural 1. The important thing that I try to keep in mind and express to my players about this house rule is that I need to describe what happens to the player and why they need to stop and end their turn. So if they roll a 1 on a combat maneuver, maybe they stumble and take the rest of their turn catching their balance. Maybe they sneeze, maybe their sleeve gets wrapped around their hand and they have to take a few seconds to untangle it. Either way, the failure that happens isn't the player's fault. It's simply the universe just sending some bad luck their way. A player's level of skill has nothing to do with rolling a 1 on a d20, so a critical failure should be equally representative for the character. A natural 1 isn't anybody's fault, just like losing your balance isn't your fault. It just happens. Now I know that there have been some things put out there on Twitter and D&D has officially stated that critical failures really shouldn't take a huge part of anybody's gameplay, and I get it, I do, because it is really discouraging to roll a natural 1, especially if you do it a bunch of times in a game, and older editions of Dungeons & Dragons and Pathfinder were especially punishing when it came to things like that. But the thing that I really try to remember, and the reason why I do think critical failures are important, just goes back to that original thing that I said. Small failures help you appreciate when you make those big successes. And like I already said, if it's a small enough thing, that your player has dealt with where it's just not their fault and it's just a complete accident, then yeah, their turn ends, but their character isn't destroyed. So in combat, out of combat, I feel like critical failures can have a place, and if your players want to include them, then more's the better. Now, the other side of a critical failure is a critical success. So if my party chooses to include critical failures in the rules, then it makes sense that they would also choose to include critical successes, which of course would come whenever they roll a natural 20. Everybody loves a nat 20. There's like so many shirts about it, and I'm sure I'll put some somewhere on the screen. Most of the time, a critical success can find its way into combat easier than anything else. In the 5th edition Player's Handbook, a critical hit happens when a player rolls a natural 20. The player doubles up on damage and continues on. That's fine. It allows for a smooth transitional process through combat that doesn't really lag. However, to me, a natural 20 is a rare and beautiful thing. If my party is choosing to be burdened by a critical failure, they should be given the opportunity to revel in a critical success. So here's my house rule. A natural 20 is a critical hit, and they will get their damage doubled. However, the player gets to roll again. If the second roll also meets or beats their target's armor class, they get to roll a percentile dice, then pick a critical hit effect off of any number of critical hit tables available online, and I'll leave a link to some of my favorites down in the comments. Actually, no, description. Comments are a different thing. Some of you may be saying, hey, I recognize that from Pathfinder, and you'd be right. Pathfinder is awesome, and there are many other things that it does very well. I highly recommend that you play it. But back to critical successes. Because if, wonder of wonders, they roll a second natural 20, then they get to roll one more time. If the player rolls 3 natural 20s in a row, it is an immediate instant kill of whatever the players are fighting. This is called the hat trick instant kill. So that would be 1 natural 20 for the first attack, another natural 20 to confirm the critical hit, and a third natural 20 to bring it home. I've been a DM for a very long time, and I've only ever seen this happen 3 times. I've done it once, and I've had one extremely lucky player do it twice in the same night. It bears mentioning that, to me, a natural 20 does not mean an automatic success. It just means that if you succeed, you succeeded quite well. If a player wants to do something that's actually impossible, like say, I don't know, drink an ocean, no amount of natural 20s in the world is gonna make that happen. So just keep that in mind. Natural 20s are not God mode, at least to me. Choosing your own ability scores. Lots of players come to the table with ideas for characters already in their minds. Sometimes these characters have been thought of days or even years in advance. So when it comes time to create their character, it doesn't make sense, for me at least, to have them roll up a random set of ability scores and leave their character's kind of meat and potatoes creation to chance. I know that there are also things like point buy, which sure, if you're up for that, that also makes a lot of sense. And there are mathematical formula that sort of help you to create a first level character that is considered to be rounded out. But point buys are fine if you have a player that wants to kind of compromise a little bit, and there's nothing wrong with compromise. But if you have a player who's incredibly sure that they know how they want the ability scores of their character to sort of be built on that first level, generally speaking, I have never really had a problem with players actually just saying so long to the point buy system, not rolling d6s, and just choosing whatever they want. And the reason that I say that, and I've been doing this for a number of years now, is that if I tell my players, hey, just make your ability scores whatever they want, you just have to explain to me as the GM why you've chosen them that way. Most of the time, the players are actually really cool about it. They're fair about it. They're gonna limit themselves because they want their character to be able to represent, on paper at least, using the formula from Dungeons and Dragons, to be what they created in their mind. It's something that is a creative expression of an idea that they've had for a character. And if you know in your mind that you want a fast and charismatic character, and you can sort of compromise a little bit in the terms of constitution or wisdom or intelligence or strength, I've actually found that in a lot of cases, players actually handicap themselves a little bit. And the reason I say that is because they know in their minds that they want their characters to be exceptional in very specific ways. They may even want their characters to be unexceptional in very specific ways. I honestly wouldn't be surprised if I went back and sort of added up all the level 1 statistics of the ability scores from the players I've given this sort of, I guess, I don't know, permission to over the last several years, if it actually didn't kind of come out being a little bit less than it would be if you had given them the opportunity to do a points buy. And I know that it seems a little, I don't know, what's the word I'm looking for here? Permissive? Yeah, I guess it is. I think it's okay to let your players just sort of get what they want in terms of an ability score because, again, I really haven't found any players to be particularly game-breaking whenever it comes to this. Nobody, as far as my memory serves, has ever created something that I haven't been able to actually challenge in-game. And that's not to say like, check me out, I'm really good. That's just to say that players have an honest expression of what they want their characters to be most of the time. And you know what? If you give them the permission to choose their own ability scores, they're probably going to surprise you by making something fairly well-rounded. Give it a try. No PvP without consent. Because players wanting to square off their characters against each other is nothing new. If you have 2 barbarians in the party, then they may want to see which one is tougher. However, if only one of them wants to get into combat with the other one, it can be a bit of a conflict. Sometimes, if you have 2 players that are having some difficulty out of game, it can manifest itself in-game. Sometimes it's something like a snide comment, sometimes it's a full-blown player versus player combat. Sometimes a player may feel like they're angry and they express that anger in-game. Other times a player may feel like their anger towards another character is acceptable in-game. It's that sort of I'm doing what my character would do type of idea. So in order to help minimize this, I have a pretty simple house rule. I don't allow in-game PvP between players unless they agree that they want to fight. Even then, I don't allow the combat between the players to extend deeply into an aggressive space with like personal attacks from player to player, not necessarily just character to character. Some of you may have actually never come across this before, and that's great, but some of you may have absolutely come across this before when one player wants to fight another player. PvP combat is one of those things that requires a great deal of trust between the entire group, GM included, to be used and executed effectively. Now, this can lead to a larger conversation about consent as well. If the combat fits into the narrative and both players are comfortable with it, there's no reason for them not to fight. But if one of the players wants to fight and the other player doesn't want to fight, then it's my job as the game master not to question or coerce the player that doesn't want to fight. Because nobody should feel like they need to give a reason why they don't want to fight another character. It's just something that they don't have to do. It's just not going to happen. No judgment from me, no judgment from the other players, and from anybody else needs to happen. This also means that if a player wants to fight another player and they've agreed to it in the past, it doesn't mean that they'd agree to it for all time. Each instance of PvP needs to be completely consensual. If you'd like to watch a truly excellent video about the concept of consent, I cannot recommend enough from the Thames Valley Police. I'll leave a button up somewhere here and down in the description. Either way, consent for each individual PvP combat must be given from the players and must be agreed to by the GM. Because if both players want to fight, but I know it's going to lead to a larger issue, I have to reserve the right to shut that down as the game master. I want to point out, I'm not perfect in this myself. I've let combat between players happen, and sometimes it can lead to benefits between the players, but most of the time, it leads to more conflict between the players and less fun for everybody involved. And I do want to say, it's okay to be angry, but it's not okay to hurt other people. It can also disrupt the game for other players that aren't involved in the conflict when some people are taking out their frustrations on one another. So descriptive helping. The help action in 5th edition is really nice. It allows for players to give each other advantage in and out of combat. The specific rules in 5th edition state you can lend your aid to another creature in the completion of a task. When you take the help action, the creature you aid gains advantage on the next ability check it makes to perform the task you're helping with, provided that it makes the check before the start of your next turn. Alternatively, you can aid a friendly creature in attacking a creature within 5 feet of you. You feign, distract the target, or in some other way team up to make your ally's attack more effective. If your ally attacks the target before your next turn, the first attack roll is made with advantage. My change to this rule is pretty simple. If a player says, "Can I help?" I usually respond, "Sure. How are you going to help?" Because in my house rule, in order to achieve a successful helping action, a player must describe how their action will aid the other player. This can be as simple as the barbarian distracting a noble while the rogue picks their pocket, or a wizard creating light for the ranger while they track an animal. In my opinion, those types of small descriptions offered by your players can help them to get involved more deeply in the world they're playing in. Alternatively, if I have a player who isn't comfortable describing something, I would ask them to think about how they would want to assist and choose a specific skill they would want to use in order to help. And if the player isn't comfortable with picking a skill or is pretty new to the game, I might even suggest that the player they're helping pick a skill that they can choose to actually do the help action. For example, if the bard wants to help the fighter in a pit fight, but the player with the bard doesn't know what skill they want to use to help them, the person playing the fighter could suggest that the bard uses performance to toss out an insult or rally the crowd. The players that are having to describe their help actions actually get kind of a kick out of the idea that they get to describe how using performance or sleight of hand or athletics give whatever player they're helping a chance to actually be successful. And it's just that little extra level of flavor, and I'm sure a lot of you are already doing something like this, but when I started doing this with my players, they really enjoyed the aspect of describing how they're helping, and they started to do it a lot more. So to me, that's always a win. So that's all I've got. Thank you so much for watching. I appreciate you being here. I know that these house rules are probably pretty simple, and I'm sure that a lot of you have already instituted something like this in your games. If you have any questions about these, or you've got some house rules of your own, please feel free to leave them down here in the comment section, or you can follow me on Instagram or Twitter at TabletopTheory1. You can also listen to this episode on Spotify, Apple Music, or wherever you get your podcasts. And if you have any other comments that you would like to share, I would love it if you would come and interact with me in those spaces. And also, if you'd like to become a supporter of this channel, you can head over to my Buy Me a Coffee account. The link is down in the description, and you can become a supporter for $5 a month to help support some of the costs of creating these episodes. Other than that, I really appreciate you being here. Thanks so much, and have a good one. So, exciting news. I'm going to be speaking at a panel at PAX West in Labor Day weekend in a couple of weeks. So I'm really excited about this. I'm going to be speaking on a panel talking about applied RPG work that would be using RPGs to actually help people with mental health and deal with other issues on Saturday, September 4th at 1:30 p.m. in the Sandworm Theater, Pacific Standard Time. I'm going to be there, and I would really love it if you all would want to come out and say hi, socially distanced and safe, of course, mask up. I'm going to be wearing my mask. I'm really excited about this to the point where I'm actually kind of dealing with a lot of nervous energy. I know that right now it's kind of like YouTube personality, but like seriously, I'm like really nervous about this. So one thing that I've been trying to talk myself back through using is something that I actually brought up a few months ago on this channel, and it's a technique called square breathing. Now, there's a couple of studies that I'm sure I'll leave some links to down in the description that talk about how deep breathing can actually help regulate your heart rate and help deal with some forms of anxiety, but square breathing is just another step of that. So what square breathing is, just for those of you that may not have remembered the last time I brought this up, is taking breaths over counts of 4 and drawing a square with your finger. So it goes something like this. Breathe in for 4 seconds, and breathe out for 4 seconds. Then breathe in for 4 seconds, and then breathe out for 4 seconds. And doing that a couple of times actually just now really does help deal with some of the apprehension and anxiety and nerves that I'm feeling about getting a chance to talk to you all about something that I truly care about. So, if you're going to be in the Pacific Northwest area and you want to come have some socially distanced communication with me and some other really wonderful people at PAX West, I'll look forward to meeting you. Until next time, take care, be kind, and have fun adventuring.